So before he was Pope Benedict XVI, he was just Joseph Ratzinger, a young theologian really wrestling with one of the biggest questions of his time. Today, we're going to dive into his early thinking, to really get a handle on the intellectual journey that shaped his entire worldview. And you have to remember the context here. This is post-war Europe, a world really dominated by secular thought. So for Ratzinger, this wasn't just some dusty academic question. No, it was the central challenge. How could faith still make sense of things like progress and suffering and, well, the whole direction of human history? And believe it or not, this whole quest would lead him to a moment of really intense crisis. I mean, we're talking about a point where his entire academic career was hanging by a thread. We are definitely going to get into the heart of that drama in just a little bit. Okay, so to really get Ratzinger, first have to get the world he was responding to, right? The whole intellectual climate of post-war Germany, it was totally defined by this one powerful idea that had swept across Europe centuries before. That idea was the Aufklärung, what we call the Enlightenment. You know, that great European awakening that basically put human reason on a pedestal as the ultimate authority for everything. But here's the crucial part. Ratzinger didn't just want to reject it, no way. His whole project was to engage with it, to show that faith had its own really solid way of understanding the world. And to figure that out, he decided to look way, way back into the past for some answers. So where does he start? Well, his first big step was his doctoral work, and he dives deep into the great 4th century theologian St. Augustine. See, Ratzinger had this hunch that if he was ever going to answer the modern world, he first had to get a real grip on the ancient church and all of its messy, complicated reality. And what he pulls out of Augustine is this absolutely critical insight. The church? It's not some perfect, squeaky clean club just for saints. Not at all. It's a real, concrete, historical thing, It's deeply human, and because of that, it's also deeply flawed. Augustine had this image of the church as a mixed body, kind of like a field where you have both wheat and weeds growing together, and you can't separate them until the final harvest. So on one hand, it's the holy body of Christ, but on the other, because it's full of sinners, it also contains what Augustine provocatively called the body of the devil. Yeah, pretty stark language. And this idea becomes the absolute bedrock for Ratzinger. The history of the church isn't just some simple, straight line of progress. Nope, it's a constant internal battle between good and evil, between holiness and sin, and it's all playing out inside this one very real, very human community. Okay, so he's used Augustine to establish that the church is this gritty historical reality. What's next? Well, for his next big academic project, Ratzinger turns to a medieval theologian named St. Bonaventure. And folks, this is where things get explosive. This is where his ideas basically ignited a firestorm. I'm not kidding. His big thesis on Bonaventure, it was actually rejected by his reviewer at first. I mean, that is a shocking move in academia, and it seriously threatened to end his career before it even got off the ground. And to really get how high the stakes were, you gotta understand what a habilitation is. In a German university system, it's basically the golden ticket. It's the non-negotiable key to becoming a tenured professor. So failing at this stage, that would have been an absolute professional catastrophe. Game over. Listen to this. Ratzinger himself later called the whole experience a nightmare. Even after he went back, revised the work, and finally got it accepted, he said that anxiety just lingered. You can tell this wasn't just some abstract academic disagreement. For him, it was a deep, personal trial over the entire direction his mind was heading. So you have to be asking, right? What on earth could be so controversial about a study of a 13th century theologian that it would cause this much drama in the 1950s? Well, it all boiled down to a really radical idea, an idea about the very nature of revelation itself. See, the standard view back then was that revelation, God showing himself to humanity, was a done deal. It was something finished, like a box of truths that was locked away in the Bible. But Ratzinger, drawing on Bonaventure, came along and argued for something way more dynamic. His argument was basically this. Revelation isn't just a static book. It's an act. And think about it. An act needs someone to receive it, right? So for revelation to actually be complete, there has to be a living, breathing person, what he called a receiving subject, who gets it, who perceives it. And the implication of that was huge. It meant the church wasn't just a museum guard for old texts. It was an essential, living part of revelation itself, right here and now. So this idea of revelation as a living, breathing event, it kind of opened up a whole new door for Ratzinger. And it led him to an even more provocative figure who had influenced Bonaventure, an abbot named Joachim of Fiore. And this guy saw history itself as a kind of unfolding prophecy. So Joachim had this theory that split all of history into three big ages. First, you have the age of the Father, that's the Old Testament. Then, the age of the Son, which is the era of the New Testament and the Church. But, and this is the wild part, he prophesied a third age to come, the age of the Spirit, a future time of total peace and complete spiritual understanding. Now, to a lot of people, this idea of a third age sounded like a radical revolution that would just make the church obsolete, right? But Ratzinger, looking at it through Bonaventure's eyes, he saw it totally differently. For him, the age of the Spirit wasn't about replacing the church. It was about its ultimate fulfillment. It was the final goal, the full blossoming of what the church was always meant to be. Okay, so let's pull all these threads together. How does all this connect? I mean, how could a messy, struggling church from Augustine, plus a prophetic future from Bonaventure, how could that possibly add up to an answer for the modern world? This is really Ratzinger's masterstroke, how he weaves it all together. From Augustine, he gets that gritty, real-world picture of a church that exists in human history, full of struggle. Then, from Bonaventure, he takes this incredible idea that history isn't random, it has a direction. It's the stage where God's story keeps unfolding. And when you put those two things together, boom, you get his core conclusion. Faith isn't about escaping history, it's a dynamic journey through it. And right there, that is the heart of his answer to the Enlightenment, to the Aufklärung. He wasn't arguing against reason at all. What he was arguing is that human reason finds its true home, its ultimate meaning, only when you place it inside this much bigger story, the grand, unfolding narrative of faith moving through history. There's a quote from Ratzinger that just perfectly captures his whole project. You see, for him, theology wasn't about having all these abstract, certain answers. It was about figuring out where we're going by having the courage to really understand where we've been. So this really leaves us with a pretty provocative thought, doesn't it? If history really is an unfolding story the way Ratzinger argued, then his whole intellectual quest isn't just about him. It's a challenge to every single one of us. It makes you ask, what patterns can we see in our own past? And just what, might they be telling us about the future that's still waiting to unfold?